People hear digital dollar and picture convenience. Faster payments, fewer fees, maybe even a cleaner financial system. The pitch is always the same: this is just money catching up with the internet. But what if the real upgrade isn't speed, or safety, or inclusion? What if the upgrade is leverage? What if the digital dollar isn't built to serve you at all, but to make the people who already steer the system harder to resist? If that sounds paranoid, ask a simpler question first: when has a new money tool ever arrived without changing who gets to say yes and who gets stuck hearing no? The trap isn't that money becomes digital. Money already is, for most Americans, most days. The trap is that the issuer and the rulemaker can become the same interface you must use, in real time, for every transaction. That's not a technical change. That's a political change disguised as a software update. At first, it will be framed as optional. A public alternative to private payment apps. A safer rail backed by the full faith of the state. The promise will be neutral: no drama, no ideology, just modernization. And that is exactly why it works. Because the most effective forms of control don't feel like control. They feel like convenience, like relief, like finally fixing what has always been annoying. People don't march in the streets to defend the right to stand in line, fill out forms, and wait 3 days for a transfer. They applaud the button that makes the waiting disappear. The deeper story is older than apps and QR codes. It starts with a permanent anxiety that sits underneath every modern government: the fear that its own money system can't be steered fast enough when things break. Wars, panics, bank runs, supply shocks, sudden inflation, sudden deflation, sudden unemployment. Every crisis is also a race for decision speed. When decision speed matters, institutions look for shortcuts. They don't always call them shortcuts. They call them reforms, stabilization, modernization, emergency measures, temporary programs. The words change, but the appetite stays the same: fewer intermediaries, fewer veto points, fewer places where a policy can die. A digital dollar can be sold as a new kind of cash. But it doesn't behave like cash once it's programmable, traceable by default, and administrable at the level of individual accounts. Cash is a bearer instrument. It does not know who you are. It does not care where you've been. It does not ask permission. A system-run digital dollar can know all of that. Not in theory, but in the basic architecture. Even if officials swear they won't use that power, the power is still there. And power that can be used tends to be used, especially when leaders can call it necessary. Look at how necessary has worked in American money history. When the state wants a certain outcome, it rarely announces it as control. It frames it as rescue, as fairness, as order. The argument is always that the alternative is chaos, and chaos is the one thing no serious person can accept. During emergencies, the state does not ask for permission in the same way. It asks for trust. It asks for patience. It asks you to understand that this is complicated, and that people who don't cooperate are making it worse. The public usually agrees, because emergencies make people tired, and tired people trade rights for rest. The digital dollar arrives with a built-in emergency logic. If the problem is speed, then the solution is direct rails. If the problem is leakage, then the solution is tracking. If the problem is fraud, then the solution is identity. If the problem is instability, then the solution is control of flows. Each of those solutions has a shadow. Direct rails can become direct intervention. Tracking can become permanent memory. Identity can become access conditional on behavior. Control of flows can become the ability to freeze, throttle, or expire money without passing a new law in the old way. You can already see the shape of this argument in how money policy evolved long before any FedCoin label existed. The modern system learned to manage the economy by influencing credit conditions, by shaping the cost of borrowing, by guiding expectations. That's abstract, indirect, and often unpopular, because it's hard to explain and easy to blame. A digital dollar offers something different. It offers the fantasy of precision. Instead of moving one interest rate and hoping the rest of the system responds, you can target stimulus to specific people, regions, or behaviors. Instead of hoping banks pass along policy, you can bypass them. Instead of persuading markets, you can code outcomes. Ask what kind of institution wouldn't be tempted by that. Not a villain. Not a comic book tyrant. Just a stressed bureaucracy staring at rising prices, angry voters, and a clock that doesn't stop. If you could flip a switch and calm a panic, wouldn't you at least want the switch on the wall? The justification will always be a story about public good. Faster disaster relief. Better distribution of benefits. Fraud reduction. Lower remittance costs. Financial inclusion. These are real problems, and the people selling the solution know that. The cleanest trap uses real pain as bait. But watch what gets quietly redefined along the way. Inclusion can mean everyone has an account, but it can also mean nobody can opt out. Safety can mean fewer scams, but it can also mean fewer private spaces. Efficiency can mean lower costs, but it can also mean fewer protections and fewer intermediaries to absorb pressure. Intermediaries are not just parasites taking fees. They are also buffers. Commercial banks, payment networks, card issuers, and even the messy patchwork of legacy rails create friction. And friction, in politics, can be a kind of freedom, because friction slows down enforcement. When enforcement is instant, policies change flavor. A penalty that used to require a court can become an automated rule. A freeze that used to require a judge can become a compliance flag. A suspicion that used to need evidence can become a risk score that silently limits your options. People will say, that can't happen here. And they'll be half right. It won't happen like that at first. It will happen as exceptions. It will happen at the margins. It will happen to people who are easy to dislike, so that most people can feel safe while the precedent is built. Then the exception becomes normal, because the infrastructure is already there. Once a system can do something, policymakers start designing policy that assumes it can do that thing. The software makes a capability cheap, and cheap capabilities become routine. That's how modern institutions change without ever admitting they changed. There is also a geopolitical angle that rarely gets said plainly. The dollar isn't just America's money. It's a global instrument of trade, reserves, and sanctions. The power of the dollar system has always been partly about visibility, partly about access, and partly about choke points. A digital dollar that becomes widely used could expand those choke points. It could also invite retaliation. Rival systems won't sit still while America improves its ability to monitor and restrict flows. They'll build alternatives, encourage fragmentation, and push bilateral networks that avoid the dominant rails. So the same tool that promises stability could accelerate global financial splintering. More parallel systems. More incompatibilities. More pressure on allies to choose sides. And in a fragmented world, the temptation to tighten the rules at home grows stronger, because trust abroad gets weaker. Now bring it back to domestic politics. A digital dollar would be created in a country that can't agree on anything for long. Every election swings priorities. Every crisis becomes a referendum on who deserves help and who deserves punishment. Imagine handing a programmable money layer to that kind of political climate. Today, one coalition might want tight controls in the name of security. Tomorrow, another might want tight controls in the name of justice. Each side will insist it's different, that its motives are pure, that it's only targeting the bad people. And the code won't care about motives. Code is the dream of depoliticized policy. But it's also the perfect container for politics, because rules can be enforced without debate once the platform is accepted. That's the silent part of the bargain. You get convenience, and in return you accept a system where rules can be changed at the administrative layer. People assume the threat is that officials will see every purchase. That's the easy fear, and it's not even the most potent one. The more potent fear is that officials will be able to shape what purchases are possible, at scale, with speed, under the banner of risk management. Risk management is the modern magic phrase. It sounds technical. It sounds boring. It sounds like the opposite of ideology. And because it sounds boring, it can swallow huge decisions without resistance. What counts as risky? What counts as suspicious? What counts as harmful? Those are not purely technical judgments. They are arguments about values. A digital dollar can turn value arguments into automated outcomes. Even if the system is designed with privacy protections, the incentives pull in one direction. Every scandal will demand more monitoring. Every fraud case will demand more identity verification. Every extremist incident will demand faster financial interdiction. Every budget shortfall will revive the dream of more efficient tax enforcement. Each new demand will sound reasonable in isolation. Nobody wants criminals to thrive. Nobody wants to subsidize scams. Nobody wants tax evasion to win. But the accumulation is the point. A system built to satisfy every reasonable demand becomes a system where the default is permission life. This is where the FedCoin trap gets real. The label suggests a single sinister product. The reality would be a long transition in which private and public systems merge into one layered stack. Your bank becomes an interface to a public ledger, or a public token becomes an asset inside private wallets, and the lines blur. Blurred lines are useful. When something goes wrong, accountability becomes fog. Was it a bank decision? Was it a platform decision? Was it a policy decision? Was it an algorithmic decision? Consumers get stuck arguing with a support desk that can always point elsewhere. The system's defenders will say the design can prevent abuse. They'll talk about limits, about legal process, about firewalls between agencies, about transparency reports. Some of those safeguards could be real. But safeguards do not remove temptation, and they do not remove mission creep. And mission creep is not a conspiracy. It's institutional gravity. Agencies expand their scope because problems expand, because politics demands action, because budgets follow relevance, because nobody gets promoted for saying we should do less. In a programmable system, doing more becomes easy. There is another angle that sounds technical but ends up being moral. A digital dollar could allow negative interest rates or time-limited stimulus. Money that fades if you don't spend it. Money that becomes less valuable if you save. Policies like that are often pitched as tools to fight recessions. But ask what that does to ordinary people's sense of security. Saving is how households build breathing room. It's how they handle surprise medical bills, layoffs, broken cars, rent hikes. If the money system starts penalizing the instinct to save, what replaces that stability? More debt. More dependence. Dependence is not just financial. It's psychological. When your survival feels tied to a platform and its rules, you become more compliant. Not because someone threatened you, but because the cost of dissent becomes too high. The quietest forms of power are the ones people enforce on themselves. The digital dollar also shifts what counts as a bank run. In the old world, runs were physical lines in social panic. In the modern world, runs are taps on screens, funds leaving in minutes. If a digital dollar offers a safe public asset one tap away, the speed of runs could increase. To prevent that, designers might impose limits. Caps, throttles, windows, settlement delays, conversion rules. That's reasonable risk management again. But look at what it means. The public gets used to a money system where access depends on conditions, because conditions are needed for stability. Stability becomes the universal justification. And stability is always a moving target. If inflation rises, stability demands control. If unemployment rises, stability demands stimulus. If markets wobble, stability demands backstops. If banks wobble, stability demands restrictions. Stability is the word that can excuse anything. There's a deeper historical pattern hiding here. The American state has repeatedly built new financial architecture in response to crisis, then kept the architecture after the crisis ends. Emergency tools become standing tools. Temporary programs become permanent capabilities. What's introduced as a patch becomes the blueprint. The digital dollar is likely to follow that script. It will be rolled out around a plausible emergency. A payment disruption. A cyber incident. A banking panic. A geopolitical shock. A wave of fraud. The specific trigger matters less than the emotional fact, a moment when the public wants a fix more than it wants a debate. And once the fix exists, it will grow. Because platforms are never built to stay small. They are built to become standard. Standards are efficient, and efficiency is persuasive. After a few years, opting out will start to feel like choosing to live without roads. This is where the meaning of cash-like becomes the central fight. Cash lets you transact without leaving a trail that can be queried, scored, or reinterpreted later. That trait isn't about hiding crimes. It's about having a life that isn't fully legible to institutions. Institutions don't need to be malicious to misuse legibility. They can simply be wrong. Data can be incomplete. Models can be biased. Flags can be triggered by patterns that correlate with poverty, migration, or trauma. When money access is automated, errors become punishments. And the person punished usually has the least ability to fix the mistake. They can't hire lawyers. They can't wait on hold for 8 hours. They can't go a week without funds. So the system that promised inclusion can become a machine that excludes with bureaucratic efficiency. Now the pivot. The most dangerous part of the digital dollar may not be surveillance at all. It may be legitimacy. If money becomes a platform, then platform logic enters politics. Disagreement becomes a compliance problem. Protest becomes a risk factor. Controversy becomes a reason to restrict access temporarily. People will insist that's impossible under constitutional limits. But constitutional limits are enforced through institutions, and institutions respond to context. In times of fear, people ask institutions to do things they would reject in calm times. And once institutions learn what they can do, they rarely forget. The digital dollar would also change the meaning of private sector innovation. Today, private payment tools compete on features, fees, and user experience. With a public digital rail, competition shifts toward compliance and integration. The winners become the firms best at managing regulatory relationships. That kind of innovation is not consumer-driven. It's policy-driven. It breeds a financial ecosystem that looks dynamic from the outside while becoming standardized at the core. You get dozens of wallet brands, but the same rules set underneath them, and the same choke points above them. Choke points concentrate power. Concentrated power attracts lobbying. Lobbying shapes rules. Rules shape markets. Markets shape politics. That's not theory. That's how American financial history has always worked, in cycles that look like reform and consolidation happening at the same time. The phrase digital dollar sounds like the future. But the mechanics rhyme with an old story, the state trying to see more, move faster, and govern money more directly, while promising that none of this is about control. The trap is that the promise can be sincere and still be misleading. Because even sincere promises can't bind future leaders. Even good designs can be repurposed. Even privacy protections can be amended. Even only for emergencies can become emergencies are frequent now. The tool outlives the intent. So what should a viewer do with this? Not panic. Not treat every policy proposal as a secret plot. The point is colder than that. The point is to recognize that money is a form of governance, and changing money architecture changes the balance of power, even when no one says that out loud. A digital dollar could be built with strong privacy, strict due process, and hard limits on programmability. It could be designed to mimic cash as much as possible. But the more it mimics cash, the less it satisfies the institutional appetite that drives the project in the first place. That appetite is speed and control under pressure. The public wants convenience, but the state wants capacity. Those wants overlap only partially. And when the two conflict, history suggests the state's needs tend to win, especially when leaders can say they are protecting everyone. In the end, the FedCoin trap is not a coin. It's a mindset. It's the belief that technical architecture is neutral, that governance can be coded without politics, that power can be expanded without changing the meaning of freedom. It's the idea that you can build a perfect tool and trust that it won't be used imperfectly. The quiet question is what happens when your money becomes an account that can be managed like a policy lever? What happens when every crisis becomes a reason to rewrite the rules of access? What happens when opting out stops being practical, and consent becomes a historical memory? Maybe the digital dollar never becomes what its critics fear. Maybe it ends up as a narrow payment rail, boring and limited, one option among many. But even that outcome depends on choices made now, before the emergency, before the pressure, before the reasonable exceptions start piling up. And if the choice is being made quietly, in white papers and pilot programs and technical committees, then the public debate arrives late, after the infrastructure is already real. That's the oldest trick in modern governance. Build the platform first. Argue about the rules later. So the lingering question isn't whether the digital dollar is coming, or what it will be called. The question is what kind of country builds a money system it can't easily stop using. And when the next crisis hits, who will be grateful that the switch exists, and who will discover what it feels like to live inside it?